Welcome back to The Cinnamon Effect. I'm Kimberly Hand, and today I have Scott Feinberg with me. Scott Feinberg is a depth work coach and author of the book Reverse Graffiti, The Sacred Art of Unbecoming, which reached the top 15 worldwide on the Amazon new release lists for both meditation and poetry. He is the host of the Healing the Divide podcast, which explores the intersectional relationship between political reform, deep healing, global events, philosophy, spirituality, and art. Scott is the founder of Kula, a yoga, shala, and wellness collective in Jupiter, Florida, where he has trained and mentored over 500 yoga and meditation teachers. He has been a teacher of the inner arts traditions for over 22 years and is most deeply inspired by the capacity for inner work to support people in both integrating trauma and supporting the further foundation for deeper spiritual self-inquiry and its impact upon human consciousness within the context of self-connection, coupleship, and culture. Welcome, Scott.
Thank you so much, Kimberly. It's an honor to be with you today. I'm grateful to be here.
It's an honor to have you. And I always like to tell a little story about how I know my guests. And I have been in your yoga space before and took a class led by you. And I will say you set the most magical space when you're teaching yoga. And I really had never felt that before. I mean, from the candlelight to the sound bowls and your like soothing voice, like it's a very special place.
Oh, thank you so much. Yeah, I appreciate that so much. Teaching yoga, even teaching, it doesn't feel like the proper descriptor, but holding that space feels very ceremonial for me. It feels like a getting to, if that makes sense, to get to have that seat and hold that space for human beings to come into an experience of deeper connection with themselves, like what you read in the intro there. That's it's something that I don't think many of us grew up with, was having some sort of a practice that supported us in turning towards ourselves, regardless of the state that we happen to be in that day, in that moment, and have a way back to our own root of our own true nature. So that feels really special. So thank you for the recognition of that.
No, I think it's important to say that because it's very intentional. You can tell what you do in that room is very intentional, and how you hold space for people is just impressive. And I will also add to that I had taken your yoga class, and then we just recently met up again and kind of chatted about doing this podcast together and talked about your podcast and my podcast. And you know, we had like such a great conversation, and I felt like another thing I want to express to you is that I see like how present you are able to be. Like, I feel like you are the gold standard of being present in a moment. I really feel that from you. And maybe we just kind of like chat about that, is like how to be present in today's world when there's so many distractions, there's so much going on, you know, but even just sitting there sharing like a coffee with you is like, you are like in this moment completely. How do you do that? It seems like the magical art that you've mastered.
Well, I'm laughing externally and internally right now, because if you were to ask my children that, they would agree, but they would say he can only do one thing at a time. It's so frustrating.
Ah, interesting. You know, I was actually thinking on the way here, like, okay, when he's like loading and unloading the dishwasher, is he like fully in the moment in that dishwasher?
Absolutely. It's a running joke in our home, because whatever I do it fully. And I experience stress with the fragmentation of attention. So it's been an intentional practice, you know, to not multitask so much. It's not something that works for my nervous system. And I find there's great gift in really being present with where I am. And of course, sometimes there's, you know, a curse in that as well. Someone's
Yeah.
like, I've asked you 3 times. I was like, oh, sorry, I didn't hear you. I was so focused. People like, you're not paying attention. I'm like, no, I'm just paying attention to something else.
Right. Fully with your full being, you're in it.
It is funny because sometimes I'll not be able to hear anything, if we could be in the coffee shop, having, an opportunity to share conversation and I will not really hear what is around me. But I really, so to the degree that it's beneficial, I'll share to answer your question that it starts with being generous with not just material items, but generous with things like attention. And that when we give of our full presence to something or someone, that really is the richness of life to me. So for all the things that we think about giving and receiving and in transactional terms, I think attention is one of the ones that is often overlooked. And I believe that is a practice that begins with giving that attention to ourselves. So for me, that comes in the form of meditation and sitting quietly. Ideally, each morning, I prefer that time when it just feels more quiet. I have a little saying I like for myself, which is center before I enter. And
I like
if
that.
I'm able to do that, then I feel more grounded in what feels almost like a background silence that is behind all of the sounds of life and a background stillness that is behind all of the movement of life. And it feels more easeful and natural to be present to that backdrop when I take time to connect with it first. And then it feels like I don't get too tossed around by things if I can come back to that and kind of dip my toes into it periodically as I move through the day. I think of it as like cleaning as I go. And that way, when I come back to the end of the day, it's less accumulation of internal noise, which increases presence. And then there is sort of like a spiritual compound interest that continues to grow through something like that. And for me, it's valuable because I feel like that's the basis of how we really see each other and get each other. And that's really the medicine for a more connected world.
Yeah, that's so beautiful because I totally agree with you. The attention is not there. Our heads are down. We're too busy shuffling from one thing to the next. And you're so right in that. So I would like to know kind of what you have a meditation practice in the morning. Can you take me through a little, because you teach meditation? I would just love for you to kind of dissect how you do that in a day.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a subject I'm passionate about. I think it's wrought with a lot of misperception. And so it kind of breaks my heart, to be honest, because I see a lot of people turn away from the practice after 1 or 2 times because they have somehow been inculcated with this idea that it's about getting the mind to be quiet. And so when they encounter the busyness of their mind, they tend to get a little frustrated and go, it's not for me. I can't do that. My mind's too busy. And for me, that's like saying I'm too hungry to eat.
Yeah.
It's like, wait, that doesn't make sense. Something's off here. And so for me, I guess the basic, vow that I make to myself when I sit down to meditate is, if I allow everything its own nature, it allows me mine. And so I start by just landing in the space with a few breaths just to make a conscious arriving. And then I notice my external environment, the sights, the sounds, the smells. I kind of open the senses. So instead of trying to shut everything out, I just, in a sense, make an agreement with the environment, with nature, to have its nature, to be what it is. I'm not intervening. I'm not interfering. And then I extend that same grace to my own self. And as a yoga teacher, yoga sits on a rich tradition of philosophy. And at the center of a lot of it is an understanding of the nature of being, what we are. And And there's many different schools and traditions of yoga, so I don't mean to sort of do a broad brushstroke or homogenize them, because there's great variegatedness amongst them. But one of the tenets that holds true for most of them until it reaches maybe a certain point, which is self itself, is that we have a body, we have an energy field, we have emotions and thoughts. We have the capacity to witness all of those phenomenological, ephemeral, changing, fluctuating experiences of our nature. And behind that, there's a deeper experience of consciousness that is sometimes described as joy or bliss. It's kind of I think of it as the awe of recognition. It's that space of starting to glimpse who we are behind all the things that we fall into false identification with. And so meditation for me is slowly moving through those layers, and each one doing the same practice that I described with the external environment. So I check in with my body, the sensations. I notice the state of my nervous system. I notice the rhythms of my breath. I don't try to control. I don't try to intervene. I just let presence rest there for a moment.
Okay.
And I'm still aware of maybe there's birds outside. Maybe there's a distant hum of traffic. So now we're aware of environment and body. So nothing is excluded. It's not a closing out or closing off of experience. It's actually a widening of the lens of awareness to include more rather than push out everything. It's opening up to let everything be. And we just go in and we notice, like, where's my energy today? Am I feeling a little depleted? Am I excited? Do I feel fatigued? Do I feel neutral? Where is that in my body? Can I connect those things? And then same thing, just kind of rest there and noticing. And then I invite in my emotional state. And I name the emotions that I feel. If I can connect them to the body and where they are, that sort of integrates the layers as we move through them. And so it just, again, not judging emotion. It's the one where we're most caught. So I do spend a little bit more presence and attention noticing, can I be with emotion without being the emotion? I think as humans, that's kind of what we're navigating most of the time, is the enmeshment or self-association as the emotion, as if it is telling us who we are rather than how we are. Or it's a suppression, and how do I get away from this? How do I feel better? Or how do I keep feeling great? And we're always sort of jockeying for position with a more idealized version of our emotional landscape. And so if we can widen our awareness around the emotions and just let it have its nature, which is to arise, to exist, and to dissolve, then we're starting to create a deeper ground of experience for that to have its nature. So then we continue and I just go a little further in and notice the internal commentary. And this is like this is like
the things you want to shut out, but
And again, just kind of noticing the intervening narratives, and I want more of this, less of this, what is that? And instead of, again, trying to make that be something that it's not, which is quiet and still, I just kind of notice it as if I were like watching the kids play, as if I was even looking from inside out the window into the backyard. And it's like, okay, they're just almost like it's like a rummaging around a little bit in the mind. And it almost feels like a thought stream where it's like thought after thought after thought, as if the mind were a movie projector just producing an endless stream of thoughts. And, even if I could turn off the projector for a moment, like, who cares? It's just going to start up again. So that can't be the sum total of what meditation is. And so we get a little curious here and go, so what happened if I could just let that be and not try to quiet the mind, not try to shut it down, but just notice? And something magical happens in that noticing, which is thoughts are shifted from subject orientation to object orientation. Now, instead of being, my thoughts, I'm seeing my thoughts.
Okay.
Which means identity is now expanding beyond the version of I that is generated by the thoughts, the emotions, the energy, the body, and the environment. And now we're sort of really entering that state of meditation where there's like a witness consciousness, able to perceive what's happening, kind of dislodges or uncouples us from that associated identity without shutting it down, which is important. And nowhere along the way did we say this has to stop. We just said there's something more. And in that experience, now we're still in, philosophically speaking, in a state of dualism where there's a seer, a seeing, and a seen.
Okay.
So there's something more than that. And it's in that moment when we can essentially ask the question, who's meditating? And so it's as if we turn the witness upon the witness and we realize there's an I here, this I that I call myself Scott or Kimberly, and they're the ones moving through this. But isn't that just an incarnate version of us? Like, who are we in the birthless, deathless, eternal sense? And
that's more like the ego.
all
right?
of that's still ego to some level. And again, not bashing ego. Actually, only ego would bash ego, to be
right.
clear.
That's what ego does. Yeah.
Yeah. And so without demonizing ego, because it's nature to want to operate as an individuated experience, that's fine as long as individuation does not equate to separation. So when we can experience individuation without separation, ego becomes instrument rather than I. And so what we're doing fundamentally as we meditate is we're bringing awareness beyond the ego identification, just like all the other experiences, not to shut it down, but to ultimately expand into a deeper inquiry of who am I even beyond this. And that's an experience we can't necessarily will into being. It's something like grace and merit intermingled, where for whatever reason, words don't reach, intellect doesn't reach, because if intellect could encapsulate this, then it would be an evolutionary iteration of the intellect, but it's the other way around. So now our thinking instrument, our analytical instrument, is in a position where it's not capable of grasping. And it's that very experience itself that opens us to the awe of recognition and the idea that it's not something that we get, it's something that we are. And then we just rest in that. It's like we get to bathe in that. So to me, that's really the entry point into the meditative state. And all the things I've described up to now is sort of a preparatory experience that can, sometimes it'll end in any number of those experiences because it's different every day.
Okay.
So it's about the discipline to just, or the devotion even more so than discipline to show up. And just follow that to whatever degree it brings you that day. But that's kind of the heart of it. That took probably longer to describe than it does to actually practice. It's kind of it's different, like I said, every day, but it becomes a little bit more natural. And then at that state, it's predominantly just, you're not really interfering with anything. You're just letting environment be, letting body be, letting energy be, letting thoughts be, letting emotions be, and then realizing who is this I that is meditating, letting that be, and then just all of that lets you be. And if you can just steep in that for a little bit, it is profound.
Wow. I love that you described it so intricately and eloquently as you did. You know, it just really took me through the process of it. I've never really dissected, you know, people say, oh, meditation, oh, I can't do it. Oh, my mind is going. And you just gave it life as, you know, to watch what's happening, to listen, to feel, to identify in the body. Do you ever find that, because I'm really big on, I read a book and I can't remember what it is, but I actually always refer to it whenever I have pain in my body or something feels persistent as far as an issue. I'm like, well, what does this relate to? Which emotion does this relate to? Do you know the book I'm talking about?
I think you're talking about Louise Hay.
Louise Hay, you could, yes, she does do that, but there's another book that goes even like further. It's thicker and it goes into greater detail on it. But do you ever find that you make that connection with the emotional and the physical and say, like, once you identify, so like, I think, resentment has a place in the body. Anger is that like in the stomach, I believe, like these different places. Do you ever then go from there and say, now I have to work on these emotions because it's living here? Or maybe you don't know what it is. Maybe you have like a weird problem that nobody has the answer to, right? I mean, do you think that is related to like a persistent emotion?
100% yes.
Yeah.
I mean, I think the simplest sense, wherever our bodies go, our emotions are coming with us. Mm-hmm. So there's something to be said for the willingness to begin the exploration of where our emotions inhabit our bodies. And there's a long history of exploring this through various wisdom traditions. One of the ones that I lean on a little bit for this is Taoism, and its contributions to the yogic lineage through Yin Yoga have been incredible, because Yin Yoga is essentially a meditation practice that is more somatically emphasized, wherein periodically every few minutes you change the shape that the body is in, but you're quiet, you're not active, you're in a meditative experience inside of the container of a yoga posture. And the reason I bring that up is because when we're in a yin shape, it will impact the flow of energy into our organs, and each organ has a particular emotion that it's correlated with. And so if I want to work with a particular emotion in a more refined sense, I might actually bring in yin, so that I know I'm actually supporting the nourishment of the chi or the prana flowing into that particular channel to nourish that particular organ and support the health of that emotion from a physical and energetic standpoint. So that's really important, that we think of ourselves not just as compartmentalized emotion here, thought there, nervous system here, where it's all separate. When we understand the whole being as a continuum of consciousness, and we can impact any aspect of that continuum by working with any other aspect of that continuum, we're incredibly empowered. You just look at your human body itself. Like, you don't have muscles that connect to tendons, that connect to bones. You have muscle tissue that morphs into tendinous tissue, that morphs into bone. It's one tissue. Your entire body is one tissue. So if you just were to extrapolate that out, your entire being would be one tissue. All of us as a whole, a collective of souls, would be one thing. Yeah. And that gets into the philosophical, but at the emotional, physical level, from what I described earlier with those layers, what in yoga we call the koshas, between the physical body and the emotional body is the energy body that acts kind of like a bridge. And why yin works so well for that is that our connective tissue operates as the circuitry or the ground substance through which energy travels in our body. And that's why an acupuncturist would put a needle into your fascia. And what yin does is it impacts your fascia. So absolutely, you could nourish with those practices. But even if you weren't going to shift your position and your physical posture, and you were just going to meditate, yes, if you could identify, like, I'm feeling sadness or grief in my heart, or nervousness in my belly, what I prefer to do, I created my own meditation specifically for that I teach in our meditation trainings. and I call it emotional bandwidth meditation. And
I love that.
yeah, and it's specifically for what you described. How do I expand the bandwidth around the emotion that I experience? And it actually begins with what we call resourcing, which is a term in trauma work for anchoring to safety. So that could be like the ground that I'm on. It could be a mantra. It could be a place in my body. So for example, like if I imagine that my heart is my anchor and there's nervousness in my belly or anxiety in my belly, let's call it, I can take a deep breath in and I can send energy from my heart into the belly. And then as I exhale, I can move the energy back out from the belly. And now I can ultimately just start to breathe in and out of the belly, knowing I can come back to the heart if I need to. So there's always the capacity to return to anchor. And the idea is that the coming in and the back out, we call pendulation, allows for working with intense or difficult emotion in a way that doesn't overly stimulate or re-traumatize, because we know we always say feel in order to heal. Well, sometimes feel can mean re-traumatize. So when we're working with where emotion is stored in the body, the first principle is to establish safety, and the second principle is to establish agency to come in and come out. And then if we can do that slowly or titrate it over a long period of time, we have a felt experience of being able to be with something that was really difficult for us. And it's not just the leaning into the feeling, it's the agency to move away from it that we were often deprived of when that emotion got set in. So the real empowerment often happens in the leaning out, not just the leaning in. And so if we can identify where we are holding or storing or accumulating that energy in our physical body, and imagine that the breath moving into that space is like an emissary of healing attention flowing in. And the exhale, and this is subtle but important, the exhale is not a breathing, let's call it anxiety, not breathing anxiety out. It's letting anxiety breathe out. And I know that's subtle and it sounds linguistic and semantics, but it's really not. And the reason I presence this is that when we say, I'm going to breathe my anger out or let go of what no longer serves me, or any of these sort of cliched sayings, that the problem with them is they invalidate the part of us that has cultivated those patterns as a protective mechanism. And that makes us feel unsafe to set them down. It's a scary process for the little ones that live inside of us that have developed those patterns in order to stay safe. So for a while they did serve us. And so that part of us is going to feel some level of threat to just set them down. And that could then actually ramp up the anxiety about putting down anxiety if I've used anxiety to stay safe. So instead, we just offer that part of us the space to ventilate, to breathe out, and then come back to safety. And if that part of us can connect, oh, okay, I could do that for one breath. That's powerful. Let's try it again.
I love that it's more like you don't have to be the one forcing it out, like breathing it out. You're letting it kind of flow out, right?
Just to restore its nature.
Which kind of takes the pressure. It almost feels like it takes the pressure off of you as the person, right? Like there's not anything I have to be doing, because it probably feels like a lot of work, right? But like, let it just flow from you. And I love that. Feels just a little easier.
Yeah, it's a softer approach. It's not, I'm going to get in there and get rid of this thing. It's I'm just going to hold space for it to have the experience that maybe it never got to have before. Maybe I never got to have before, which is space to feel, space to breathe. I mean, just being with it is so healing. And I think so often when we think about healing work, we think about, okay, well, what is my insight and what's the solution? And, and it's about presence and compassion. And so whether that's with ourselves or with someone else, that I feel like so often what's therapeutic is company that witnesses us compassionately, company that doesn't judge us for the experiences that we're having in our humanhood.
Maybe back to the attention that you were talking about, it's all that, that presence and being attentive to yourself as well as to the people that are in your sphere and that you love and you want to devote that time to.
100%. And part of that presence is, understanding what gets in the way of it. So it's not only like, how do we stay, present, or how do we cultivate presence, but getting curious around what brings me away from that. Because in a sense, that's our natural state. It's almost more like what's pulling me away from my natural state. And probably the big pattern to look for is what I am in resistance to in somebody else's experience is a reflection of a space of resistance I am in towards my own experience. So if your emotions feel unsettling for me, I might want to look at like, what is my relationship with difficult emotions?
Yes. I that concept at first, I think, was a little, well, I don't know. I don't think anything about that person really bothers me. But then, you can dissect that further and be like, oh, wow. Yeah. What they're doing is, triggering something in me. How do you kind of work on that from looking at someone maybe that's more successful than you are, or they're just doing something, they're being like frivolous with their money, or, just something that someone is doing. And I think that can be kind of related to what we're seeing on social media, right? Like there's people, I don't know, just they're putting their lives out there. So they're doing something that maybe you just have not ever been exposed to. And now that you see it, you're like, oh, that person just bugs me,
Yeah. Well, I think starting with the recognition that that's totally understandable. That's part of this human journey is, we're figuring it out along the way, and it, and we do have these moments, and they don't make us any less anything, and so extending a little grace to ourselves for maybe being envious or getting frustrated, or, like we're doing the best we can. But if the internal narrator of our experience is using any opportunity to judge us for being human, that's a non-renewable resource. It's not going to continue. And so even if we notice that, can we be kind to that part? So anywhere awareness enters in, can we, acknowledge ourselves for coming into that awareness rather than using it as an invitation to condemn or critique ourselves for it. And so I think first and foremost, establishing the gentleness around the journey is the groundwork. And then if we were going to work with it specifically, I am in agreement with you, and there's a little nuance here, which is I personally don't subscribe to the idea of you spot it, you got it. I think that's kind of like feel it to heal it. These are, just because they rhyme does not make them true.
Right.
There's elements of truth to them, but they're big blanket statements that are deprived of nuance, that unfortunately funnel people into, in the space of feel it to heal it, oftentimes re-traumatizing themselves in the name of integrating parts of themselves. And in spot it, you got it, it's not able, it prevents you from being able to connect with what exactly about that experience is triggering, without thinking that if you're being, let's say, rude to me and I recognize it, that means I'm rude. That's selling the experience short. But if I recognize your rudeness and I'm triggered by it, that's interesting. Doesn't mean I'm rude, but it means that I'm taking something personally, that your rudeness actually isn't about me. It's about the relationship that you keep with you. And so I can now use that as an opportunity to see, okay, I take things personal that aren't about me. That's powerful. That's an empowering realization, because now I can begin the work of noticing when I do that, reminding myself that it's about that other person. Eventually, I'll begin to send compassion to you, because I'll just see, oh, only somebody that's in a space of hurt would be extending that energy. I hope you have a better day, like silently, and not in a like way that's being cutting in any way, but you begin to offer that because you're operating from the premise of our shared humanity.
Yes.
And so, in the case of, let's say, jealousy, we might look at somebody and say, wow, they've progressed further along the path, and they're more successful, or that, fill it in with our human stories.
Yeah.
And we can go to, well, what part of me is looking for achievement or recognition, or whatever it is about that. If we can get specific about what it is that we perceive that they have that we don't, and start to get curious with what that thing is, most of the time there is an unmet need that is living inside of us that we are outsourcing to something else. So if it's recognition in the form of success, well, where have I made success the basis of security, the basis of value, the basis of meaning or worth? And if I'm able to see that, oh, I've outsourced that, then the trigger becomes an ally, because it's operating as a reminder to bring to my awareness that, oh yeah, that's right, I am fundamentally secure. My essence is not subjectable to threat. And if somebody is working along a path that is similar to me, and it's for an altruistic end, if I want to support the healing of humanity by showing up in this particular way, and somebody else is doing that work too, I don't want to show up as being threatened by them. I'm grateful that we have more people working towards this vision.
Yes. Yes. I love that. Oh my gosh. You really nailed that response on that, because it's just so much truth there. I wanted to ask trauma informed, I noticed. Can you speak on that? What exactly is that? You are trauma informed.
Sure. Thank you for the question. The basis of being trauma informed in whatever scope of practice one shows up in is an approach that presumes in the unseen aspects of one's experience, there is trauma being held. So operating in a way that is kind of on the safe side, saying let's put it in the context of I'm teaching a yoga class and there are 20 people in the room. I have no idea what they are carrying within them to their practice, through their week, from their life. They are not just a body in a room. They are all those layers that we described. And so tread sensitively and skillfully in a variety of tools. Like there's the ones I mentioned earlier: resourcing, agency, pendulation, titration. Those are all trauma-informed tools to work with people, but also understanding how to read what's happening with the body and the nervous system, and how to really comprehend that where we're at right now in this conversation, seemingly regulated in our nervous systems, having a fairly high level conversation around the nature of things. If we were to encounter a different version of ourselves, maybe it was this morning, maybe it's tonight, maybe it was 10 days ago, where we were in that triggered moment, or we are in a potentially re-traumatized moment, these capacities are not available to our brains, our literal brains. And so in these moments, trauma-informed tools are primarily, first and foremost, somatic in information or in expression, because when we're in that traumatized state, the information flows from our body to our brains. It's not flowing from brain to body. So it's important for us to be able, whether it's coach or teacher, guide, whatever it might be, to be able to support people in nervous system regulation so that they can, first and foremost, feel themselves, feel present and safe in their bodies. And online, they're not in a heightened amygdala response. Their prefrontal cortex is online there. And there's a variety of tools that are primarily based in something physical or somatic to do. This could be like shaking, it could be tapping, it could be different eye gazing practices. Yoga is a great one. Feeling the ground, connecting to sensations and sensory experiences. There's a whole slew of them. I actually keep a list in my phone for myself, because sometimes the only thing I can remember is like open note on phone.
Yeah, right.
And breathing practices.
When you're in that moment, when you're feeling that trauma arise, and the more I learn about it, everybody has experienced some trauma at some point. They say like little T or big T. So not little, but, could be something that wasn't as, earth shattering as the big T. But how do you, so you're saying like when someone comes into your class, you obviously don't know their past experiences, but have you been able to kind of identify when someone is, going through something traumatic? Like I've taken yoga classes before, and when you were talking about yin being very difficult because I had emotions that I needed to kind of let flow through me, but it can be a very uncomfortable class for some people, right? Because you're sitting in those poses for longer periods of time, and it feels so uncomfortable sometimes, and I've definitely had that experience, but so you're kind of able to see when someone is maybe struggling
sometimes
a little bit more. Yeah.
Yeah. Sometimes. I mean, honestly, we don't know what we don't know. So, we have different attachment styles, we have different Enneagram, conflict resolution styles. There's all these proclivities of our various personalities. I, for example, will have deep emotional release experiences, and nobody would be able to tell. I'm an avoidant attachment style. I'm a withdrawn Enneagram. Like everything comports to you will not see anything. It happens primarily as an internal experience for me, but somebody else might emote more, externally, and there'll be other signs. So as space holders, we look for that, and we seek to offer. But part of the trauma-informed piece is we speak to it even if we don't see it. If you're feeling this, give yourself the grace to come out of the pose. It's not an obligation to stay here for 5 minutes. If it's starting to get too intense, come away from it. If you came away from it just with like, oh, cool, thanks. Like, notice that too. Like, are we in avoidance or are we in agency? Because they can conflate. And it's important for us to notice where the request is being made from to let's say in this case, move away from experience. And just notice, is that the space that our aligned wisdom would seek to choose from? And if so, awesome. Acknowledge that, come back, give yourself the space, come back in when you're ready. If not, good noticing. Stay with it. If you're comfortable, if you can breathe, in a relaxed fashion, if your heart is not racing, if you sense all the indicators of I'm online, this is okay, then we're welcome to stay with it. But because what you spoke to so eloquently earlier in our conversation of the emotions live in the body is very much in those practices where those things will show up, not just on the entrance into practice, what we might notice, but what comes up in the middle of it. And sometimes this can really catch people off guard. And so it's important. Another trauma-informed tool is to set the space in advance of the practice. If this comes up during practice, this is what we'll do. You know? And so the more you can really take good care of a space preemptively, it allows everybody to feel safe. And being triggered in some way, I want to say this as well, is not necessarily an indicator that something is wrong or bad, or you know, this is an inevitable aspect of life. We're deeply resilient as beings, and it's essentially like a flare coming up from our nervous system saying, okay, we came upon something here. So learning how to befriend our triggers and work with them as allies and catch them early in their arc is part of the adaptive and resilience skill that we actually can train up as humans. And to go back to where we started with meditation, to me, that's a way of cultivating the spacious ground of being that is more available for when those moments come. Part of this, I didn't say this earlier, is that for me, again, personally, when I meditate, I'm not meditating for when I'm meditating. I'm meditating for when I'm not.
That is important to take with you throughout your day and your experiences, right? To kind of rely back on, well, I felt those moments of peace, right? I can get there.
And I am there. It's actually, I'll just say this, it's not a space we ever truly leave. It's fundamentally there. And that's the beauty of it. We can't lose it and we can't gain it because we are it. All it was in the meditation, it was something that was revealed as the ground of our being. And then it's a matter of letting identity become established in that ground. And the only way to do that is to notice when we don't do that and use that as an opportunity to reclaim that. And now it's like turning liabilities into assets, because everything that you thought was in the way was actually pointing the way. And so the trigger comes up and it's like, cool. Okay, here's another piece coming up for integration. This is powerful. I'm going to work with this rather than just like boom and acting out from it.
Taking it, using it constructively.
Absolutely. You alchemize your adversity into your artistry, really. You know, it becomes not just a space back to neutral, but when I think of art, I think of an offering. It's a creation. So really, you know, you think of really the most beautiful things that people have created, like even you creating this podcast, this is your art. And I don't think you would have been sitting in this seat across from me right now if not for the adversities that revealed themselves to you and created some sort of arc of intentionality that has inspired you to show up in a meaningful way, probably to support in other people some of the things you've moved through and wanting to give that back in some way to humanity. And I mean, that's turning a negative to a positive right there. That's something really beautiful. If not for those triggers and those difficult times, we're not sitting here right now. So a lot of times the beginning of my practices, I give thanks to every experience that has ever challenged me to the degree of opening me.
I love that. That's so beautiful. And thank you for that compliment. That's very sweet. And I do feel that way. You know, I do feel that way. And you're the same with your, you know, whatever you have a voice to, you feel like you have kind of earned a badge in some way. Right. And like, you want to share that, you know? That's really special. I'm wondering how did you get to this place? Like, how did you find yoga? I mean, was there some kind of experience that you had, something that you moved through that kind of brought you into this world? And that can be, I mean, you can talk about like, I mean, early on or meaningful moment that brought you there, but just wondering what your journey was like.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. I'm asking myself that question a lot as well. It's almost like the more we expand our awareness, the more possibilities come in. And when I study the various philosophical streams, within yoga and Buddhism, particularly, they hold notions that we transmigrate through many different incarnations. And, so I'm not necessarily from this standpoint, Scott, sitting in this body across from you right now. Only I am that, but I'm also something that is, beyond that. And it's a little bit beyond our pay grade, again, from the intellect and the awe of that great mystery is, it brings us into a state of presence that is, it's really beautiful. It's as if the question is more powerful than the answer. So I honor the question that you asked. And I say that just because I don't know, I don't know what, I came in with. I don't know when I was a baby. I can remember being little kid, playing by the pool. I couldn't have been more than 4 or 5. And I just looked at my mom, I was sitting on the ground, and I can still visualize her standing above me and saying, "Mom, one day I'm going to help people to become happier."
Really?
Yeah. It's just all right, man. Another day, probably, that same age-ish, we're in the backyard and she's gardening and I'm just playing in the dirt. And she is internally recollecting a conversation that she was having recently over the phone. She had not shared with me, with a friend of hers. We grew up on a canal behind our house, and her friend had shared with her this story of how it's tragic, really, but her dog had ran into the backyard barking at an alligator, and the alligator ate the dog, came out and attacked the dog and ate the dog. And,
wow.
I didn't know any of this. I'm just playing in the dirt. My mom's recollecting it internally, and I tap on my mom, it's on her knee or something, and point to the canal, and I say, "Look, Mommy, the alligator ate the doggy." Oh. And she just dropped the shovel and was like, "Whoa." And so I don't know, I don't know what proclivities, we carry with us, from beyond whatever this experience is. And while there's a part of me that wants to know, I'm deeply curious, I also, I like holding it more as an open question of I think so often we get closed around our beliefs, and there's something powerful about being open to not knowing rather than being closed in belief. And I enjoy the feeling of that. I love questions, but it's as if these little stories have threaded themselves through this whole journey. And, as a little child, maybe about a year after that, when I was 5 or so, I had really severe asthma. I spent a big part of my kindergarten in living inside of oxygen tents in hospitals and missing school. But the beautiful thing, to the point of what we were just speaking about, is they couldn't help me, and it was getting worse and worse. And my dad, and this is going back to 1980 now, we were in Florida, and he found a naturopathic doctor in Colorado that essentially taught him how to teach me visualization, imagery, pranayama as a 5-year-old. I mean, call it pranayama, but it was, just what we were describing with the emotional bandwidth. He would put a stethoscope on different parts of my lungs and say, breathe into this space and out from that space. And, so all these little things kind of added up. And by the time I was exposed to meditation and yoga, it was the end of college into the late 90s. And it took there was already something in there. So I have a hard time making that part the origin story, if you will. And I think it must have pushed on something that feels much more ancient.
Yeah. That's familiar to me.
Yes.
So your parents seemed very open to all of that as well. Did they practice any of that when you were a child, or
I was incredibly blessed. I am incredibly blessed to have the parents that I do. And they didn't practice things like meditation or yoga or mindfulness or anything, though. My dad, he was into law of attraction. I remember him giving me books of cassette tapes when I was a teenager. And, and it's kind of cool though. When I turned 15 or so, I think he gave me The Power of Positive Thinking to
Okay.
read by Norman Vincent Peale. And my mother gave me Many Lives, Many Masters by Dr. Brian Weiss. And those two things, again, touched on something. And I'm really grateful for them, that just their hearts to open the experiences that they had within their own journeys, and always wanting to pay it forward and offer what they could and support what they were being, what they were seeing come up within me, and to nurture those natural tendencies. So, yeah, I don't think I ever heard the word yoga until much later, and I think I might have thrown them all for a loop when this is what I want to do with my life. This was not a choice with the guidance counselor in high school. Coaching and yoga and writing was, and writing has been another tool that's been very therapeutic to me that's helped sort through some of these processes.
Well, I'd love to ask you, you have a book, Reverse Graffiti. Explain that title. I'm so intrigued. What is it about?
Yeah. So it's interesting. We were speaking about a little bit ago, this idea of we're not attaining anything, we're just revealing. And so reverse graffiti is that process actually turning into art, as we were talking about. So if you're not familiar, if you're listening to the podcast and you're not familiar with reverse graffiti, I encourage you just to pop it in Google, click on the images and see the art, because it's really amazing. And the idea is it's art that's created by taking pressure washers and sponges and rags to dirty walls in cities and clearing off portions of the dirt. So the juxtaposition between the dirt and the true nature of the wall beneath it creates words or images. And
cool.
Yeah, it's a really neat thing. And the first time I saw it, I was like, whoa, this is like inner work. I mean, This is it. Or inner work becomes outer work in the form of our artistry. So a couple of things blew me away. I think first and foremost that we look at the wall and we say, that's a dirty wall. Well, it's not. It's actually, when we say that, we're conflating the conditioned nature of the wall with the true nature of the wall beneath it. So dirt has accumulated on the wall, but the wall itself is not dirt or dirty. It's just dirt on a wall that is fundamentally clean. And if you have the proper tool, you can actually clear away that conditioning and reveal what's beneath it. But the story doesn't end there, because it wouldn't be art without the dirt.
Right.
So it's just blows my mind.
The magical, I mean, that's that, if you take anything away from this podcast, it's that sentence right there.
Yeah. So for me, because writing is therapeutic, I would often express my pain in the form of poetry, and typically to myself, as in write it into my phone or into a notebook as a way of processing emotion that would otherwise just get stored. Like we were talking about, its way that could get it to move ultimately out, and I could always feel it clearing. So for years, I just accumulated poetry born from pain, really, and the inspiration and insights and different things that I would just keep for myself. And so eventually, I started thinking, there's value here. Let me put it on Instagram or make a post here on Facebook or something like that. And I could start to read it in my yoga class when people are dropping into Shavasana or coming out, or, in the middle of that yin space. And then people come up and go, where did you get that? Who wrote that? Where can I find it? And I'd be kind of meek, and I'd be like, well, that's mine. I would never even state the author, which I always do to give credit, but it was mine. I didn't feel comfortable with that. So they'd just be like, where did you get that? And I'm like, well, it's mine. Where can I find it? It's just on my phone. So after a while, I put a note in my phone every morning at 7 a.m. It said, don't die with these writings on your phone. And it felt really scary to put them, because it's vulnerable, and it's my own pain, and largely put into universal, tones of the human journey, and et cetera. And I can just remember one day, once I did it, somebody asked me, how did you get over the fear of that, to put it out there? That must have been so scary. And I said, I never got over that fear. I still have that fear, whether it's a podcast, a book, a class. I get nervous before every class I teach. I was nervous this morning sitting down to talk with you. I am deeply shy by nature, and being out in the open and exposed in any way is scary for me, but I have greater fear. It's scarier for me to live with it unexpressed. And so it's just kind of like one fear is trumping another one, and that's okay. And I give myself that grace and that courage. And I will say though, that while I still can feel those things, I do feel increasingly more comfortable in bringing them out, as I sense that the water is safe to enter into.
Yeah.
And we spoke about this when we had coffee, and it's like, even if it's anything like, call it an Instagram page, I monitor that to make sure that there's not, hateful speech or, any sort of energy that is condemning in a critical or mean-spirited way, not towards just me or what I write, but towards other people. So it feels like a space that people are safe enough to open up and share their process. And so by and large, my experience has been, I'd say 98% probably, beautiful in opening that up, and it gives me more and more courage. And so if you're listening to this podcast and this is resonating as a piece, for you, I would say I champion your voice in coming out, because we largely have a world. This gets more into the political space, I think, a little bit, and leadership space in our world. But we have a world that is largely filled with a lot of people that are seeking power over rather than to empower one another, and they're power hungry, and so when the people that are not operating from that, but they feel like they want to share, but they're silencing themselves, they're like complicit in their own canceling in a way, and their own censoring. They're creating like we as a collective, when we do that, are co-creating a void that is filled by the power hungry rather than the powerful. And so to me, it's when the loud ones learn to listen and the quiet ones start to cultivate the courage to speak and share and create, that we'll start to see a little bit more of an accelerated tipping point in our culture.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I can so relate with that, and feeling the fear of putting yourself out there and doing all that. Podcasting, I don't think is natural for me, but the fear of not being able to maybe be of service and share what I know and share these amazing, wonderful people that I get to sit down with, and, all the light and energy. And Christopher, our producer, was just saying when we came in, he was like, your guests are so awesome. He was like, I can't even pick a favorite. And I was like, I know. And I just feel so incredibly blessed to be able to, share space with people here. And so that is the overriding factor of that fear of oh my gosh, I'm on a mic and what am I going to say? And what am I going to do? And I've always kind of been that way too. I don't know, teaching a yoga class, that is, you're up in front of a group sharing an intimate space with people. I can relate that to being a dancer and being up on stage. And I had have always had severe stage fright, but I would always choose the bigger the challenge when it came to that, or the more people, I've danced in front of 60,000 people, it's that fear is very intense. I can't say I would always be oh my God, I gotta pee. No, I already peed. I'm good. But I'm scared, out of my mind. But yeah, I think that's really powerful. And I agree with you. If anyone's listening and has that idea or something inside of them, it's don't let the fear of doing it overtake you and prevent you from creating something beautiful that's in your heart, ready to come out. So, yeah.
And I don't know if you've had this, but I would have these internal imaginings of those people that have already operated in these spaces kind of going, who are you to think you could do that? That sort of that imposter syndrome piece. And what I realized is the more that I have learned to stand in my own authority in these spaces of my voice, when I see somebody cracking into it for the first time, and especially the vantage point of having trained so many teachers over the years, you start to recognize the patterns and see them. The people that are genuinely in it for the right reasons, when they see you, they're not going, who are you to do this? They are going, you got this. How can I help you? I am rooting for you. I am pulling for you. Here's a good connection. This is a great resource. What do you need? How can I support you? That's why I love coaching, because it's like, how can I be on your team to support this migration of human consciousness into more prolific expression on our planet? That's something really profound and beautiful. And it feels like an honor to get to be a part of that emergent quality of creation with human beings really going like, this inspires me, but I'm maybe getting like a little stuck at the starting point.
Yes.
And I'm bumping into some old beliefs, and it's like, awesome, let's do it. Let's get our hands dirty. Let's get in there and let's bring those parts with us as we do it. They can be there and we can move forward. It's not that they have to get fully reconciled and then I can move forward. So right now there's seats that are empty sitting next to us. So I like to imagine those parts of me, they're here with us. They're sitting in that empty seat right next to me, and they're looking and going, are you crazy right now, man? But it's like, no, we're good. We're good.
Yeah, we're good. We're doing this.
Yeah, we're fine. Everybody's good. We got this. Yeah, I got this and I got you too. You don't have to. And I think it's those younger parts of us that have felt burdened with the responsibility of doing it, and it overwhelms. And so as they learn to essentially co-regulate to the ground of our own being and all of our wisdom and all of our establishedness in who and what we truly are, going back to meditation as a gift to anchor, we learn gradually to feel safe in the places that we just haven't stepped into yet. Yeah.
I love that. I believe it or not, we're rounding into part 2 right now. So I know. So we're gonna take a quick break and then stay tuned. We're gonna have part 2 with Scott Feinberg. Scott, tell everybody how they can find you. Just they're listening to this episode right now.
Sure. So my website is embodiedinsightcoaching.com. And if you're on social media, my Instagram is just my name with a dot in the middle. So Scott.Feinberg.
Love it.
Oh, and I'll share too, if you're local to the Palm Beach, Martin County area in Florida, if you're listening down here, the website for the yoga studio is Kula, Kula, KulaYogashala.com.
Okay. Thank you so much.
Of course.